She didn't scream, she didn't fight back. She simply learned how to disappear inside her own life while still standing in it. Evelyn Hart once believed marriage would mean partnership, but what she entered instead was a system where silence was safer than speaking, and obedience was rewarded with temporary peace. Every morning began the same way, waking before everyone else just to avoid criticism about how she breathed too loudly, how she moved too slowly, how she never quite measured up to the standards set by her husband's family. What made it harder was not just the words, but the way they were delivered with calm certainty, as if her value had already been calculated and found lacking long before she arrived. Richard Cole, the man she married, had become distant in ways that felt like he was her boss instead of her husband, as though their home was a workplace she had been quietly demoted within, while his mother, Margaret Cole, ensured every corner of that house reminded Evelyn she was temporary. No one would have guessed that Evelyn's name had once been tied to something far larger than the life she was living now. She had accepted this life because she thought she had no other choice. Years earlier, before the marriage, before they slowly broke her spirit, she had been connected to a private legal structure established by her late father, a man who built wealth quietly and trusted no one easily. He never spoke in full explanations, only warnings that never made sense at the time, telling her that documents would arrive one day and that she should never rush to sign anything without understanding what stood behind it. She had ignored it then, believing life was simpler than that, believing family meant safety. But those documents never stopped arriving. They were redirected, hidden, dismissed by others in the household, until they became nothing more than unopened envelopes, collecting dust in a drawer she stopped looking inside. Meanwhile, Richard's company continued to rise in influence, the same company he proudly worked for, never realizing how closely its foundation was tied to a name Evelyn had long stopped associating with herself. Evelyn Hart didn't know it yet, but the same family that treated her like a temporary guest was built on a foundation that actually belonged to her. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The strange thing about emotional exhaustion is that from the outside, it rarely looks dramatic. People imagine suffering as loud arguments, slammed doors, and visible damage. But for Evelyn Hart, it looked like becoming smaller every year while standing in the exact same place. It looked like apologizing for things she didn't do, because correcting people felt more expensive than agreeing with them. It looked like learning the timing of footsteps in the hallway and adjusting her mood before entering a room. There had been a time when she used to laugh loudly. Friends used to say she filled every space she entered. But somewhere between becoming Ryan Cole's wife and becoming Margaret Cole's target, she stopped recognizing the woman she had once been. At first, the comments were small enough to excuse. Ryan would tell her she worried too much. Margaret would laugh and say she was sensitive. Then the comments became observations disguised as advice. Evelyn should dress differently, speak less, smile more, stop mentioning ideas nobody asked for. Ryan began making decisions without including her, and calling it efficiency. Margaret began introducing Evelyn to guests as someone who preferred staying out of business matters. The first few times Evelyn corrected her. Eventually she stopped. There was always a reason not to argue. There was always another dinner to survive. What made it harder was that Ryan was respected everywhere else. At work, people admired him. Friends described him as disciplined and driven. He remembered birthdays, opened doors, donated to charity. Evelyn started wondering whether she had become the problem because nobody else seemed to see what she saw. That question followed her everywhere. She asked herself whether she expected too much, whether marriage was supposed to feel lonely, whether adulthood simply meant becoming less important over time. One evening, after another dinner where Margaret spent 20 minutes explaining to guests how lucky Evelyn was to have married into stability, Evelyn went upstairs quietly and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them. Same paper, same legal seal, same sender. She stared at them for a long time. She remembered her father's face. Not his last day. Not the hospital. She remembered a rainy afternoon years earlier when she was 26 and impatient with advice. He had been sitting across from her in his office, adjusting papers with that calm expression that used to frustrate her. He had said something she barely listened to at the time. One day people will tell you who you are, because it benefits them if you believe it. Do not let them. She remembered laughing. She remembered telling him she wanted a normal life. She remembered him smiling in a way she only understood years later. Then he said something else. If documents arrive one day, read every page. Do not sign anything. And most importantly, do not let anyone convince you that what belongs to you belongs to them. At the time, she thought he was being overly cautious. Now she looked down at the unopened envelopes and felt something she had not felt in years. Not hope. Something quieter. Questions. The next morning, Ryan was preparing for a company event. It was all he had talked about for weeks. A leadership meeting, senior executives, important people. There was confidence in the way he moved through the house, already speaking like someone expecting promotion. Margaret noticed it too. She smiled at breakfast and said, "This is the beginning of your real future." Then she looked at Evelyn. "You should support him properly today. Opportunities like this don't happen for everyone." Evelyn looked at her coffee. Then she asked a question she had never asked before. "What company did my father work with?" The room became quiet. Ryan looked confused. Margaret answered quickly. "Why does that matter now?" Evelyn nodded slowly. And for the first time in years, she didn't apologize for asking. Margaret recovered first. People like her always did. Years of controlling conversations had taught her how to move quickly when the truth threatened to enter the room. She smiled, a practiced, brittle expression. "Evelyn, dear, your father wasn't involved in anything that matters now." The emphasis on now was a mistake. Evelyn felt it like a cold draft. Ryan adjusted his watch, the metal clicking loudly in the silence. He didn't look up. "You're overthinking old history, Ev. Those documents? Probably just boring administrative overflow." Evelyn looked at him. 8 years. 8 years of vacations, mortgage talk, and dinner reservations. Suddenly, the silence of those years felt deafening. Ryan had never once asked what her father did. He grabbed his jacket, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'll be late tonight. Big day at the firm." Margaret followed him to the door. She turned back, her hand on the frame. "Try not to stress yourself with those old papers. Not, don't worry. Not, it's okay. Old papers." She was naming the threat to keep it small. Evelyn waited until the sound of the car faded. She didn't stay seated. She went straight to the drawer. She bypassed the recent envelopes and pulled out the oldest one. The paper was heavy, the ink dark. Legal language, trust agreements, corporate structures, and then, the word that changed everything, sole controlling beneficiary. Underneath was the letter, handwritten. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, you've finally stopped asking for permission. I delayed this because I wanted you to become someone independent first. There are people who respect power, and people who respect ownership. Very few respect people. Learn the difference. Do not trust titles. Do not trust confidence. And never allow someone to convince you they gave you value when they only benefited from you forgetting your own." Evelyn's breath hitched. Benefited from her forgetting. She looked at the private number. She didn't hesitate. 1 ring. 2. Office of Hart Holdings. Evelyn's voice was a whisper she had to force out. "My name is Evelyn Hart." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, the tone shifted from professional to reverent. "Ms. Hart, we've been waiting for your authorization for 5 years. 5 years. The exact length of Ryan's big promotions." "What exactly am I authorizing?" Evelyn asked. The answer came, cold and clear. Evelyn didn't speak for a full minute. She didn't have to. The world she thought she lived in had just vanished. Evelyn remained seated on the floor with the phone pressed lightly against her ear. Her first instinct was disbelief. Not excitement. Not relief. Disbelief. Because people imagine life-changing moments arrive with certainty. They imagine music, emotion, clarity. But most of the time, they arrive quietly and ask impossible questions. The woman on the line waited patiently. Then she asked, "Ms. Hart, are you still there?" Evelyn blinked. "Yes." Another pause. Then she asked the only question that felt real. "What exactly am I authorizing?" Paper moved softly on the other side. The woman answered carefully. "For the transfer of active governance authority." Evelyn said nothing. The woman continued. For years, the structure established by your father remained inactive because final approval required your direct confirmation. Evelyn looked around the bedroom. Same walls, same furniture, same house. And suddenly everything felt unfamiliar. She swallowed. I don't understand. The woman's voice softened. That's okay. Then she said something Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. Most people in your position ask how much. You asked what responsibility means. Silence. Then, your father would have liked that. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a moment she forgot where she was. Forgot Ryan. Forgot Margaret. Forgot everything. Because for years she had quietly wondered whether her father had underestimated her. Whether he had left because life ended before he could explain things. Now she realized something painful. Maybe he had trusted her more than she trusted herself. The woman continued. There's one more thing. Evelyn opened her eyes. The executive review meeting is tomorrow. Her stomach tightened. Tomorrow. She looked at the calendar. Tomorrow was Ryan's event. So she spoke slowly. What meeting? The woman answered. The board review. Then, as controlling beneficiary, your attendance is expected. Expected. Not invited. Expected. Evelyn thanked her, ended the call, and sat in silence. She looked down at the documents again. Then one line suddenly connected itself in her mind. Company name. Same company. Same company Ryan worked for. Same company he spent years talking about. Same company Margaret constantly described as the reason their family deserved respect. Her breathing slowed. Then she laughed once. Very quietly. Not because she found anything funny. Because for the first time in years, life had asked her a question instead of giving her instructions. The next day arrived too quickly. Ryan left early. Perfect suit. Perfect tie. Perfect confidence. Margaret stood beside him near the door. She smiled proudly. You deserve this. Ryan adjusted his cuff. Then looked at Evelyn. You should come tonight. She looked up. He smiled. There'll be people there. It'll be good exposure. Exposure. She nodded. That sounds interesting. Margaret looked surprised. Evelyn never said yes to corporate events. Ryan smiled. Good. Then they left. Evelyn stood in the quiet house, walked upstairs, opened the wardrobe, and for the first time in years, she did not choose clothes that disappeared. She selected something simple, structured, elegant, nothing dramatic, nothing expensive looking, just something that reminded her she existed. Then she drove. Not to follow Ryan, to go where she had been told. The company headquarters stood taller than she imagined. Glass, steel, security, people moving quickly. She walked toward reception. The receptionist smiled professionally. Good morning. Evelyn gave her name. The receptionist looked at the screen, then froze. Not dramatically, just long enough. Her posture changed. She stood. Then another employee appeared. Then another. No confusion. No questions. Only recognition. The receptionist smiled again. Different this time. Good morning, Ms. Hart. She swallowed. We've prepared for your arrival. Prepared. A woman in a navy suit approached. Calm. Professional. She extended her hand. Welcome. Then, the board is waiting. Evelyn looked around. Waiting. For her. The elevator doors opened. Inside, executives. People in expensive suits. Nobody spoke. One by one, they nodded politely. The elevator climbed. Higher. Higher. Then stopped. The doors opened. Long hallway. Glass walls. Large conference room. And inside, Ryan, sitting confidently at the table. Margaret seated nearby as a guest. Executives arranged neatly. Presentation ready. Ryan looked relaxed. Until he looked up and saw Evelyn. For a second, nothing happened. Then he smiled awkwardly. Confused. like she had arrived at the wrong wedding. He stood, walked toward her, lowered his voice. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn looked at him. Same face, same voice, but somehow smaller. She smiled gently. Before she could answer, the room became quiet. A board member stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "Excellent." Then turned toward Evelyn. "Ms. Hart?" The entire room stood. Ryan didn't move. Margaret stopped breathing, and the board member finished the sentence. "We've been waiting for you." Nobody moved. It was not the kind of silence people imagine in movies where everything stops dramatically and faces exaggerate emotion. This silence was quieter than that, more uncomfortable, the kind of silence created when reality arrives before people are ready to accept it. Ryan remained standing halfway between his chair and the doorway. His expression did not immediately become fear. First came confusion, then calculation, then something harder to describe. He looked around the room as if waiting for someone to explain the misunderstanding. Nobody did. The board chair walked toward Evelyn and extended his hand. Not ceremonial, not performative, professional, respectful. "Ms. Hart," he said, "thank you for coming." Evelyn looked at his hand for a second before shaking it. She noticed something strange. Nobody in the room looked surprised to see her. Only Ryan and Margaret. Everyone else looked prepared, like she was late to something they had been expecting for years. The board chair turned toward the room. "Now that governance authority is present, we can begin." Governance authority. Ryan blinked. Margaret slowly sat straighter in her chair. Evelyn noticed her eyes moving quickly between faces, trying to understand what everyone else already understood. The board chair motioned toward the seat at the end of the table. The seat. Not a seat. The seat. The one Ryan had spent weeks talking about. The one he believed represented advancement, recognition, influence. Evelyn looked at it. Then she looked at Ryan. He attempted a smile. Small, controlled, the kind people use when trying to remain ahead of information. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Evelyn." She turned. His expression softened, or maybe adjusted. There has to be some confusion. She looked at him quietly. For years she had been waiting for permission to speak. Now she realized she did not need permission anymore. She answered gently, "I thought so too." Then she walked past him. No dramatic music, no speech, no anger. She simply took her seat. The room remained standing until she sat down. Then everyone else sat, except Ryan. The board chair looked up. "Mr. Cole." Ryan sat immediately. That moment lasted less than 2 seconds, but Evelyn would remember it for years, not because she enjoyed it, because she suddenly understood something. Respect that appears only after power arrives was never respect. The meeting began. Slides appeared. Reports. Forecasts. Growth numbers. Executives presented calmly. But Evelyn noticed something unusual. Every major decision paused briefly, then turned toward her. Not for approval exactly, for acknowledgement. As if the room had been operating with one missing piece. After nearly 40 minutes, the board chair closed his folder. Then he spoke. "There is one final agenda item." The room became attentive. He continued. "For legal and governance purposes, ownership confirmation and transition authority should be formally acknowledged." Ryan looked interested. Margaret smiled faintly. They still did not understand. The board chair looked toward Evelyn, then addressed the room. For those who joined after succession arrangements were established, he opened a document. The controlling ownership interest was placed into trust several years ago under the direction of Jonathan Hart. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Her father's name sounded different in that room. Not larger, just more complete. The board chair continued. The beneficiary chose not to activate authority immediately. People nodded. Normal. Expected. Then he finished. As of yesterday, active authority has been confirmed. Ryan's expression changed. Not suddenly. Gradually. Because understanding arrived in pieces. His eyes moved. Jonathan Hart. Trust. Beneficiary. Yesterday. His breathing slowed. Then, he looked at Evelyn. The room stayed quiet. The board chair smiled politely and said, "Please join me in welcoming Ms. Evelyn Hart." Nobody applauded immediately. People stood, one by one. Not celebration. Recognition. Ryan stayed seated. Margaret looked at Evelyn for a long time, then looked away. Evelyn remained still, because in that moment, she did not feel powerful. She felt something she had not felt in years, visible, and somehow, that mattered more.